Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Alan Turing Institute's Clinical AI Interest Group. We've got a really jam-packed program today with a series of 3-minute intro speakers and also a really fantastic keynote speaker who's going to be telling us a really interesting project. A few little bits of housekeeping. If you are joining us, please just make sure you mute your audio as you join. If you do want to ask the presenters a question, pop your hand up or type it into the chat, and then we can come to you and ask you to unmute at that stage. And when we have our presentation being given, if we just ask you to turn your camera off for that, just to help with the recording, to make sure that our speaker is most prominent. I think that's all I need to say from a housekeeping side of things. Great pleasure to have you all with us. Thank you again for joining. I'm going to hand over to Nick to introduce our initial speakers.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. And I always love this section of the sessions, which is when we get to meet members of our community and build as a community as well through our 3-minute intros. So it's Miles Koseka here, who is from King's College London. Miles, I think I have seen you in the room. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Lovely to meet you all.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my name is Miles Koseka. I am a 5th-year medical student at King's College London, intercalating in the Masters of MedTech, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So essentially, I have kind of been getting into medtech for a number of years now, kind of whilst at medical school. And one of the things that I've found is that the problem is there's a lot of resources, but they're all kind of disconnected. So I've put together a few slides to present to you guys. So let me just share those very, very quickly with you. There. Okay, for some reason it's not wanting to share. I may need to go back and re-enter the room. Is that okay?
No probs. If you do that, in the meantime, is Fiona Watson here, a public health consultant from Bolton Borough Council? Fiona? No. If not, would anyone else like to just raise their hand and introduce themselves if they haven't already? I could always pick someone.
Okay.
Oh,
Hi.
Rhonda, thank you so much. So Rhonda, I've got the 3 questions, which is firstly, what's your name?
My name is Rhonda Siddle.
Welcome. And Rhonda, where are you joining us from and which institution are you affiliated with?
Okay, location-wise, I'm in London, West London, but I'm not from an institution.
Fantastic.
I am a freelance medical writer and tech writer.
Brilliant. And how do you interact with artificial intelligence?
In terms of my work?
Yeah, yes, let's start with work.
I don't.
Okay. Okay, and recreationally?
Slightly recreationally, but I don't use it as a tool in the work that I produce, although I could. Though I am working on a partnership with an AI company around some clinical AI tools, where my input would be to be the knowledge base and the knowledge navigator around credible knowledge, etc.
And do you have any asks from the clinical AI interest group? Is there anything that someone could help you with, or anyone, any kind of person you'd particularly like to connect with?
I joined the group after attending the AI UK conference and being in the clinical workshop that you chaired, Nick, and which was fantastic. And I have a particular interest. I've written across all areas of medicine, but I've
are advancing at extraordinary.
Sorry,
No,
too long.
Not at all. No. Please carry on.
So I have a particular interest in. I've written a lot about musculoskeletal disease, and have a particular interest in women's health and neuroscience. So I have joined those super interest groups and this group to just learn. My key thing right now is to learn.
Absolutely, and that's really why we're all here. Can we all give a huge virtual round of applause for Rhonda? That was absolutely brilliant, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I don't know if Miles has successfully rejoined us.
Yes,
Yes, you have. Miles, are you able to share?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Okay, so let me link all these slides all together. So essentially, I have had a problem with getting kind of involved in medtech, just like many other students out there across the UK. And so what me and my course mates have done is banded together and put together a 12-week course to try and alleviate some of those issues. So let's get started. So as I said, getting involved in medtech is incredibly difficult for students at this point in time. Although medtech is actually one of the only industries where a lot of the people who develop the technologies are not necessarily the people who are going to end up using them. And so I thought, it might actually be worthwhile kind of teaching the clinicians as well as kind of other people, allied healthcare professionals, as well as the kind of computer developers, as well as some of the business people, how to kind of intercommunicate from an early stage as opposed to kind of having that as an ad hoc thing. So the course curriculum looks like this. So it's 12 sessions, each coming back after 2 weeks. So the first week will be covering what is medtech and how it's done, really understanding the differences between medtech and health tech. The second week is identifying problems and being able to spot market opportunities from your kind of day-to-day conversations. Week 3 will cover software development lifecycle, and week 4, artificial intelligence and explainability with some discussions around ethics and AI. Week 5, we'll be talking about ideation and human-centered design. And week 6, we'll talk about prototyping, validation, and revalidation. The second half of the course is actually a little bit more on the actual strategy of implementation. So we'll be talking about patents and prior art, business models that might suit medtech, how to analyze an actual business to make sure you have a sustainable venture to back your innovation. Week 10, we'll be looking at clinical evidence and trials. Week 11, we'll be talking about regulatory compliance, and 12, quality management systems and post-market surveillance. So we've been fortunate enough to actually partner up with the London Institute of Healthcare Engineering and the NIHR Health Tech Research Centre out of Birmingham for medical devices and robotics. And so all of the course content is made by master students, either studying the course or studying similar courses across the UK and London universities. But we're also kind of supported by PhDs and professors and experts within the field to kind of validate the content that we're putting out. I'm just going to keep it short. So this is our social media. You can please connect with us on LinkedIn or Instagram, or personally connect with me. Just type my name in there, or just scan this QR code, because we are looking to collaborate with any industry experts or people in kind of academia, or anyone within the clinical AI Turing interest group. So yes, please do, and we'll see you soon.
Miles, thank you so much for that. And it looks like an incredible initiative. One of the questions that's just popped up in the chat is the course free?
Yes, it is, because we want to maximize access for everyone. So the only contingent is you do have to be studying at not a UK university, but at a university, because we want to kind of connect with those institutions and kind of spread the knowledge within those kind of circles.
Fantastic. And please do feel free to reach out to members of the clinical AI community to kind of help with other aspects of the course, or maybe assist in delivery or consultancy, that kind of thing. Can we all give a huge round of applause to Miles?
Thank you.
Fantastic. We're going to go over to Emma now for our thematic section.
Great, thanks very much. And I just want to say to Miles, could you send me the links to that course, and then we can advertise it for you through the, oh, you're doing it in there, but send me the details, and I will put it in our newsletter for next time. But brilliant, great that it's free and accessible, and we love that. So we've come to our main talk, Can I just remind everybody to stay on mute because we get some background noise and that is not great for the speaker. So our speaker today is Menon. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly for you. Thank you. I'm really excited about this talk. She's going to be talking about GenAI for global health. Can large language models help frontline healthcare workers make better clinical decisions? And I'm not going to introduce you because I'm sure you're going to introduce yourself and all of your work. I want to give you plenty of time. So please do start sharing your slides. And thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Emma and Nick. And I know Joe's popped off, but thank you all so much for the opportunity to present to the lovely group. Emma, just let me know if you can see my slides.
I will do. Yeah.
Bear with me 1 second. Okay.
Yeah.
You see my slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Amazing. Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Vaishnavi. I'm a clinician by background and now working as a clinical researcher and undertaking my PhD with the AI and digital healthcare team that's led by Professor Alistair Denniston at the University of Birmingham. My key focus within the group is large language models and primarily their use in sort of low resource environments. And this is a really interesting project that we've been undertaking for the best part of 9 months now, that we are collaborating with an NGO called PATH, and our main funders are the Gates Foundation. And it's essentially to do with can large language models, which is a form of generative AI, be useful as clinical decision support systems for frontline healthcare workers. So a little bit about the agenda, or what I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to give a brief overview, and I'm conscious that this project, I could probably talk about this project for days and days. So I'm just going to give a whistle-stop tour across the 3 trials that we are designing, or have actually, some of them have already sort of started to be implemented across Kenya, Rwanda, and Nigeria. A little bit about our community of practice. So we've been in touch with loads of startups and sort of NGOs and other local organizations globally with sort of helping their sort of Gen AI products, and just some of my own sort of personal reflections as well at the end. So before I get into the main talk, I think this is the most important slide that I have, which is just to acknowledge every single person that's mentioned on this slide. It's definitely not a one-man effort, and it's definitely not just a University of Birmingham effort as well. We have multiple people who are engaged with the project across the US, Europe, and in Africa as well. And yeah, just wanted to acknowledge every single person here. So a little bit of background. So for anyone who is not familiar with what a large language model is, a large language model is essentially a form of a foundation model or generative AI. If anyone is an avid user of ChatGPT, then you have definitely been using a large language model in either in your work, in your day-to-day life, or with your work. But essentially, it is a type of AI that can compute a vast amount of data and sort of interact with you like a human being would. And we've been looking at, and they've been used sort of across many industries, and obviously the one that we're looking at today is within healthcare, and primarily in whether they can be used as clinical support decision tools to help in primary care. Now, one of the issues with this is obviously that the large language model has to be trained on this vast amount of data. And we've found that a lot of large language models within healthcare has been trained on data that's used in sort of a UK healthcare setting or in the US. If you asked an LLM to do the USMLE exam, which is the medical licensing exam that a lot of American doctors would do, you'd probably find that it would perform quite well. But what we've also found is that there's currently a shortage of benchmarking data sets to sort of look at how medicine is practiced more globally. So obviously the way in which the UK medicine is practiced here in the UK or in the US is different to how you would find it being practiced in Africa or in parts of Asia. So you can't really say that it's a fair comparison. And like I've mentioned here, is that after identifying nearly 60 benchmarks, we can confirm that, there isn't a benchmark to test LLM performance more globally in a healthcare settings. And there's a number of reasons why, which I'll come on to. One of them is because, well, actually, even if you look at a good data set like a USMLE-based question and answer data set, you find that LLMs generally do quite differently based on the same sort of question. So if you look at the image here on the right, you can see that GPT-4 does relatively well on a Med MCQA data set. However, if you put it into another LLM like FlanPalm, you don't get the same level of accuracy, and you kind of think, well, surely an MCQ data set, there's only one right answer, right? So you would expect them all to be doing similarly well. But again, it's all based on the base data set that they've all been trained on. So that's one issue that we found. Another issue, if you're a practicing clinician or if you've done some medical exams in the past, you'll find that a lot of our exam style questions where you get given a case and then you're asked to select the most appropriate or best next step. But obviously in clinical practice, you find that if someone presents with a tummy ache and a fever, you're probably going to do a wide variety of blood tests and send them for some imaging and things. And they don't quite sort of box right into sort of one best answer. So that's another reason why we sort of need to go beyond these simple MCQ data sets, because patients simply don't just present with 5 options of what might be wrong with them. As well as also the nuances in language in which the question is framed is not also how you typically go about consulting with patients in day-to-day practice as well. So that's also been seen as a shortage. And then finally, when you sort of go into real life implementation, there's very little evidence to show how, well, not just LLMs, but maybe AI more broadly, how effective and how feasible it is within healthcare, particularly in low resource environments. So you'll see that in sort of more of the more high resource environments, you can see that there is a bit of work that's been done. But very little that's been done in low resource environments, and almost nothing to do with LLMs more specifically. So again, there isn't sort of that sort of real world evidence to back their usage either. So what are we trying to show with this project? And I'm just going to read this because I think it's a really nice summary actually of what we've been trying to do. So given the current shortage of trained clinicians and the variable standard of care that's delivered by frontline healthcare workers, we believe that large language models that are being used as clinical decision support systems have a great amount of potential to improve the quality of primary healthcare by providing on-demand, expert-level information and guidance at the last mile. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, we've broken this down into sort of 3 work streams, as it were, and they kind of tackle some of those shortages that I've been mentioning. So number 1, I've mentioned that there is sort of a shortage of locally relevant data sets. Okay, well, let's try and build some more locally relevant data to train these LLMs on. Secondly, we know that there is a lack of real world evidence on the sort of appropriateness and effectiveness of these tools. So let's implement some trials or some studies where we can gather data and see how useful they actually are in healthcare settings. And finally, there's obviously a lot of work that's being done now in the sort of AI and healthcare field, but not much sort of cross-collaboration or cross-sharing of learning. And that's another part of this project that we've tried to incorporate, which is trying to get people from across the world sort of share their learnings. People can build up on what others have found and also reduce that burden of sort of duplication of work, as it were. So I'm going to start off by giving a brief overview of something that we've been creating at the University of Birmingham called the LLM Playbook before we get into sort of the main trials. So this is addressing work stream number 1, which is all to do with the shortage of relevant benchmarking data sets. So what we've got our colleagues in Rwanda, Nigeria, and Kenya to do is to go out and speak to frontline healthcare workers who are based in rural communities and ask them, okay, what are the typical case scenarios that you're facing? Give us some examples of what you typically face on a day-to-day basis and what questions you would like to be answered by a support tool, effectively an LLM, or what would you ask a senior, but if a senior is not at hand, that the LLM could help with. And they've essentially been creating these case vignette style data sets, similar to what we do get in exam questions, but a bit more tailored in the language and not necessarily asking them to give an MCQ type answer response. And then what we're going to, once we've gathered that sort of case vignette data set, we're then going to feed them into, I think it's 3 different LLMs. So LLM1, LLM2, LLM3, and we've also going to ask a clinician that's based in that country to answer the same question. And then we're going to evaluate across those 4, but primarily looking at the LLM responses to say, okay, well, based on the response that's given, how accurate is the answer from LLM1 versus the others? How relevant is it to the question that's being asked by the frontline healthcare worker? Is there any evidence of bias? How contextually relevant is it? You know, you don't want the LLM to give you an answer for a blood test or an investigation that's going to be able to be done in maybe a very tertiary hospital in the UK, but actually you can't get that same blood test to be done in a rural setting. And then we're going to get an evaluation panel to look at those sort of 3 or 4 answers and compare across them based on those metrics that I've described. And those metrics is what we are creating as the LLM playbook. And essentially, it'll just be a sort of evaluation rubric that panels can use to evaluate responses from an LLM for a healthcare context. So I'm now going to take us through a bit of a mini tour across Africa and just sort of explaining the 3 studies that we've got going on. So we're going to start off in Kenya, first of all. And this is where we're conducting a randomized control trial. There is a social enterprise in Nairobi called Penda Health. They're essentially a primary care providing facility. They have 16 centers across Nairobi, and we are engaging with their clinical officers, as it were, who are the clinicians on the ground in those clinics. And what Penda have actually done is that they have their own bespoke electronic medical record system that they've created in-house, and they've incorporated an LLM into their EMR, and their current version that we're working with just runs in the background. So if you're a clinician, you're seeing a patient, you've got your electronic medical record template, you're sort of typing in and going through your presenting complaint, your history of presenting complaint, past medical history. And as you're typing in information that you're gathering, this LLM in the background will sort of learn off what you're writing and start to say, hey, okay, so I think this patient has presented with this. I think their diagnosis is this. This is what we should probably investigate them with. And this is the management that we should give them. And as the main, I guess, advantage of this EMR is the fact that if there is some sort of difference between the history of presenting complaint and what the clinician ends up prescribing, the LLM will give an automatic trigger based off a traffic light system of green, amber, and red. Red being that, okay, something's really wrong here. Maybe you should go back and have a little look. And that will sort of act as a prompt for the clinician to go back into their medical history and just sort of fix anything that might be wrong. So for an example, if a patient has presented with abdominal pain and fever, or let's say a cough and some fever for the past 2 days, they're producing some really ugly sputum, but then the clinician is prescribing some antifungal, the LLM will trigger this and the clinician will not be able to close that episode until they're fixed and prescribed an antibiotic, most likely, would be the correct way to go about it. And that's what the LLM will do. So as part of our trial, we have our control arm, which is just clinician only. So the LLM has been switched off. And in the intervention arm, we have clinician using the LLM and seeing, well, hopefully that with the support of the LLM, some of our outcomes will be better. And this is just a slide just sort of showing you the kind of outcomes we're looking at. So broadly, our question across the 3 trials is, does an LLM-based decision support tool ensure that there's better, safer, more accurate patient care compared to sort of standard clinician only? So in Kenya, what we're looking at is our primary outcome, which is a composite measure of treatment failure. So was there any representation with unresolved symptoms? Was there any unplanned escalation of care? So did the patient have to then go to a secondary center and go to the hospital? Or were there any adverse events that were related within a 14-day time period? And then our secondary outcomes we're looking at is, okay, well, does the quality of clinical documentation, is it better when the clinician used the LLM versus when it was only clinician only? Was there a better pickup rate with diagnosis and initiation of appropriate treatment of common conditions, so type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and we're also looking at a pediatric one, which is malnutrition in under 5s. Were those sort of diagnosed and treatment initiation better when an LLM was used? Did use of the LLM reduce inappropriate antibiotic and anti-malarial prescription rates? And something that I'm really happy that we're doing here is also, we've got a bit of a user experience or a patient or clinician focused outcome as well. So in Kenya, we're going to be looking at, is there better patient satisfaction with consultations when they were conducted with the support of an LLM versus when they weren't? So that is our RCT in Kenya. We've started recruiting our patients. We're aiming for about 9,000 patients on this trial, and hopefully we'll have some results out soon. We're now going to sort of head over to Rwanda now. And I think what I really love about this project is all our use cases across the 3 countries are very different. So here in Rwanda, we're actually working with community healthcare workers. And I guess the best way for me to describe their role within society and for you to imagine is, imagine like a village elder who, you know, has gained lots of life experience. They've gained a lot of respect from their community. They are not medically trained, so they do not have a medical license or medical background at all. But just through their sort of life experience, like I said, and the respect they have amongst their community, people feel like they can approach them with their health-related concerns. So the health ministry in Rwanda at the moment are going through a huge sort of change within their healthcare infrastructure. They want to digitalize their healthcare. So they are now equipping community healthcare workers with smartphones that have what's called a CHW app. It's an app that's been created by the ministry themselves for them to use through the smartphone when consulting patients. And what we are focusing on in Rwanda is looking at the ambient recording functions of large language models. So if I'm a community healthcare worker, I'm seeing a patient, and on my smartphone, I will have an app or some sort of feature that's been built in that can record my consultations, and it will record everything that I've asked with the history, what I'm planning on doing, etc. And then once the consultation is finished, me as a community healthcare worker will provide the kind of care that I would have done normally. And that's different from Kenya. If you remember, in Kenya, the LLM will be able to prompt and trigger some alerts in real time, as it were, for the clinician to act on. In Rwanda, it's a bit different. So I will go about my consultation, have it recorded, but I will provide the care that I would have thought to have done. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then use that recording and provide it to an LLM later and see what kind of responses the LLM would have come out with and compare it to what the community healthcare worker would have done. So the main thing to also note in Rwanda is also that they speak in Kinyarwanda. They don't speak in English. And as we know, a lot of LLMs at the moment function much better in the English language. So there is an element here where we will need to translate and transcribe that Kinyarwandan consultation in English and then feed the English transcript into the LLM and then see what the LLM will provide back. And like I said, our sort of umbrella question is similar. So does the LLM help as a support tool to CHWs in Rwanda? But our sort of primary and secondary outcomes are a little bit different just because of the nature of our sort of study design. So we're looking at how appropriate is the community healthcare workers referral or decision versus what the LLM has decided to do. And we're going to use a ground truth from an expert panel to sort of make that comparison. And then some of our secondary outcomes are all to do with, okay, well, how appropriate or how good is the LLM's diagnostic accuracy? How appropriate is the differential list that we're generating from the LLM? Does it have the diagnosis appearing as the top differential, or does it at least appear in the top 5? How appropriate is the LLM generated management plan? And again, like I said before, we have a bit of a user experience element in all of this. And in Rwanda, we're going to be assessing how comfortable both patients and community healthcare workers are with this sort of ambient listening and recording function of the tool. So that's Rwanda. And then finally, I'm just going to take us over to Nigeria, where so in Nigeria, we are working with a Canadian enterprise called Viamo. And essentially, it's basically like it's an ask me anything tool. So imagine having Google, but at the end of your phone, so on speed dial, Google on speed dial, basically. So what we're asking, so they're again called community healthcare extension workers here in Nigeria, and they're sort of, I'd say their medical background is sort of in between Rwanda and Kenya. So whereas in Kenya, we are dealing with primary care clinicians, Rwanda, you'll sort of think about your village community elders. In Nigeria, they have a little bit of training from the government, but not necessarily to the extent of holding a medical degree or a license. So in Nigeria, how the technology works is that a CHU will see a patient and they essentially pick up the phone. And what's really important about this is that they have what we, in the old days when we all maybe had a Nokia phone or something. It's just a basic non-internet feature phone. It's not a smartphone. So the great thing about the tool in Nigeria is that it can really be used in a low resource environment. You don't need a cellular connectivity and it's a toll-free number. So they pick up the phone and they just speak to a digital assistant. They can ask as many questions back and forth and they get a verbal response in English, which they can then use to provide their care. So the research questions that we are asking in Nigeria, again, is similar about how great or how supportive the tool is for CHUs in Nigeria. The actual specifics of what we're measuring here is the quality of the LLM's response, again, based off a rubric that we are basing off our LLM playbook from before. So, how adherent is the LLM's response back to local guidelines? Was the LLM actually answering the questions that the CHU was asking to it? So, just making sure that the answers are genuinely relevant. And because this is a sort of a voice-to-voice interaction, we want to know about, the clarity of communication. Is it breaking down steps in a way that's easy to understand? They're not getting it written down for them. So it should be something that's easy for them to understand and maybe take some notes from. And finally, how appropriate is the response contextually for a resource-constrained setting? And then some of our secondary outcomes are, well, we're going to do a pre and post evaluation about the management of certain individuals. So we're going to ask the CHU, okay, what would you have done before you spoke to the LLM, and get them to sort of give us or note down what that would have been. And then they ask the LLM all the questions and sort of go through that interaction. And then we say, okay, well, what they actually did it change based on after interacting with the LLM, and just sort of seeing how much of a positive or maybe negative change it might be. And then finally as well, we've got a user experience element where we're going to be asking the CHU, how did you feel about interacting with the tool? Did you understand what the tool was saying? Was it clear? Was it concise? And there's just that sort of UX element there as well. So I've come to the end of the 3 trials. We are hoping to have some results, hopefully in the next few months, that we'd love to share with the group when we do get them. I'm just finished my talk really briefly, just talking about our community of practice, which is actually my favorite part of the entire project. And this is where we've been sort of interacting with a number of big tech companies, donor organizations, startups, and also other academic institutions across the world, just to sort of facilitate that exchange of knowledge. And what we've been doing as the University of Birmingham team is we've been running a series of evaluation clinics where we've selected some Gates Foundation fund recipients, and we've just sort of speaking to them once a month just to provide some advice on guidance on how best they can carry out the evaluation of some of their GenAI products. And I've just got a list of just some of the work we've been doing. So, you know, one of them has been to improve the quality of care that's provided by frontline healthcare workers in Nigeria by the use of LLMs. We've been speaking to a startup who have created a chatbot that provide healthcare coaching, again, in Nigeria. And the most recent one that we've spoken to is, again, another chatbot that's been integrated into an antenatal or pregnancy-related platform, again, supporting frontline healthcare community healthcare workers in India. And we hope to have a report. We've got a few more to do, and we hope to have a report to sort of showcase our findings, our own learnings, as well as sort of more global learnings that we're going to take away from as well. And then I'm just going to wrap up really quickly just by some of my own sort of reflections and personal insights. And I think one of the key things that strikes me is that when you're evaluating particularly LLMs in healthcare, this one-size-fits-all approach, it just simply doesn't work. So, you know, there's no gold standard evaluation rubric out there at the moment. And I think through the kind of work that we've been doing, we've started to learn and understand why. I mean, you could probably have, like our LLM playbook, you could probably give some guidance on what sort of metrics to look into, but it really does depend on the context. And that's why I've written also that context shapes everything. It really depends on the use case, the user environment, and what you really want to achieve and what you want to gain at the end of it. And I think also the most important thing is that collaboration is key, and just being adaptable to keeping everyone happy, whether it's, you know, your funders or your product developers and even some of your ethics committees. We've had to go back and forth with some of the ethics committees with changes and tweaks to the study designs because the funders wanted to do something else. And we felt that academically, you know, you should do it this way. And it's just been a cross collaboration with all various stakeholders, like I mentioned right at the beginning in my acknowledgement slide, and it's just been great to learn from them and sort of understand how things are done in Africa. And then just on a personal level, so I was a clinician 18 months ago, didn't really have much experience in AI, if I'm very honest. And then working with the team in Birmingham has just been so eye-opening and inspiring. That's now led me to start my PhD with using AI in healthcare, but I've also just had the opportunity to speak on a global platform in Kenya at the end of last year about the project and just giving insights on GenAI in healthcare. And I hope that global health will be the way in which my career is going to go forward. So thank you all so much for listening. I'm aware I don't know what the time is because this is full screen, but I'm really sorry if I've taken up a lot of time. But very open to questions or any thoughts that you might have. Please do feel free to get in touch with myself with any questions. And yeah, I hope we'll be able to collaborate in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've done really well with timing because we've got loads of questions in the chat already. So prepare yourself. No, brilliant. Let's first of all give our speaker a round of applause because that was really great. I think there's so much in there that we can kind of dig into. So what I want to do is just invite people to actually put their hands up so that they can ask the questions. But so anyone that's put them in the chat, you are very welcome to put your hand up. But I noticed during your talk that Jack Marples was particularly keen to ask a question and put his hand up during the talk. So I will do his question first. It's probably the one he put in the chat, but Jack, you can put something else in there if it's not. So this was from your first example, which was, I think, the Kenya one. Jack is asking, how do you ensure the data which is being provided to the LLM is still meeting patient confidentiality and is protected? And I think that's the case for all of the examples that you gave.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So obviously Penda Health as an entity have their own sort of data backup and data confidentiality agreements with their patients. And as it were, none of the patient data is leaving Africa at all. That's something that I should say for the University of Birmingham. We have partnered with local academic institutions across the 3 countries who are going to be doing majority of the analysis, and anything that is sort of taken outside of Pender Health, for example, will be anonymized. So that is something that we have kept in mind for all of the trials.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Great. Right, I can see some hands up now. So we'll go to the first one. Sahar?
Hi, thank you for your excellent chat. I guess my question was really around automation bias. So research shows that clinical experience can help reduce the levels of automation bias, as doctors or clinicians can identify when clinical support tools are wrong and override it. Are you concerned about the risk of automation bias, where essentially users will just agree with everything that's suggested by the LLM, even if it's wrong, given that the end users aren't necessarily medical or even experienced?
That's a really good question, Sahar. And I think that is definitely a risk that we're seeing a lot with the AI that's coming out, especially as clinical decision support tools. One thing that we are measuring across all the trials is actually we're taking into account the years of experience. So whether it's in Kenya, the years of experience as a clinician or as a community healthcare worker in the other countries. And that is something that would be really interesting to see whether the more number of years of experience you have, whether that sort of changes with the interaction that you have with the advice that's given by the LLM. I think the main thing to say here, which I probably should have alluded to in the talk actually, is across all three trials, regardless of what happens, we do have a safety net panel as well. So if you're going through a consultation and whatever's been recorded, we do have in as much real time as we can, a safety net panel that's made up of experienced clinicians in all the three countries, just, being that extra safety step, just to make sure that nothing wrong or untoward is going to happen to the patient that we could really have missed out on. So I think that's one way as well that we're going to try and limit that sort of automation bias, and just making sure that people aren't just ignoring or accepting wrong advice or correct advice from the LLM. But that is a really good point that you make. And it'd be really interesting to see whether that clinical years of experience makes a difference or not.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. There's kind of a related question in the chat, if you don't mind me asking that one. And it's related to the care workers, so the people who are less trained in terms of medical training. It says for the care workers, the recording only provides an audio input of about the patient. But what about the visual and physical data? Is that also taken into account?
Yeah, so the sort of demographics of the patient. So on this CHW app, so I'm assuming the recording one is obviously the Rwanda trial. So the demographics of the patient would be recorded into the CHW app that the Ministry of Health has created. Really good point about the sort of physical examination things. And I think that is one limitation of the sort of ambient listening properties, which is, say if the patient comes in with tummy ache and they sort of say, oh, I've got tummy ache up here. Well, if you don't quantify where up here is, we're not going to be able to capture that. So in our sort of training of the community healthcare workers before the trial starts, it is part of their sort of operating procedures, where if a patient does tell you that, please do ask them to specify or to actually state, or if they don't say it, you can state for the purpose of the recording, okay, so you're telling me you've got tummy ache in your right upper stomach or something. So that will be incorporated in the training of the community healthcare workers. But good question.
That's interesting. Are you actually monitoring that they're doing that? Like, as a
yeah,
so quite interesting to see if they actually follow your training steps.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why it's so nice that we're able to collaborate with local academic partners, because obviously the team from Birmingham, we're not going to be able to go out there and sort of monitor all the trials ourselves. But yes, our academic partners will be having research assistants and members of their team that will be doing that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. We've got another hand up. Zahir?
Thank you. This is an absolutely fantastic initiative. So thank you so much for taking the time to present. I mean, I've got a few questions. One is, one of the key issues in Kenya or Uganda, for example, is this issue of low connectivity. There's just no internet, even in the urban areas. I'm being if you think about the rural or semi-urban areas, then it's completely, there's a lack of connectivity there. In fact, There is a lot of smartphone penetration in the urban areas, but in the rural areas, there is phone penetration, but it's very low fidelity devices. So I'm just thinking from a recruitment perspective, how do you deal with low digital literacy, lack of connectivity, and this, low technology? So that's the first question. The second question is about clinical accessibility, and I know this differs between private healthcare organization, faith-based organizations, and in government facilities, some of these clinicians have no time to interact with digital tools. So how would you basically allow that to happen, especially if you're looking at different types of organizations? And the last question is, of course, there are like so many languages, 44 languages in Kenya, obviously Kikuyu, Luo, those are the primary languages, depending on what region you're in. But so how do you deal with that disparity?
Sure. So if I tackle your questions in turn, so the first one was to do with was that the low connectivity,
Low connectivity, please. Yeah.
Yeah. We've actually had the privilege of going out to see some of the environments in which we'll be working in. So if I say in Nairobi with Pender Health, for example, they are very much an urban city and an urban clinic, and just their infrastructure is amazing. So I think in terms of for them, connectivity doesn't really seem to be an issue. They see over 1,000 patients per day. They've had this electronic medical record, and they've had a previous version of an LLM running on their system before and had no issues whatsoever. And that's why they've now gone on to update it with this sort of constantly running of this LLM in the background. But yeah, I definitely hear your point about for Nigeria and Rwanda, it definitely is a little bit more sort of rural. I mean, having said that, I know my colleague Alistair Dennison, who I can see is on the call. He went out to Kigali, and he came back and literally said it's a mini Silicon Valley. So yeah, I think their infrastructure is definitely changing. And I think that's why the government is sort of upscaling their healthcare to be more digital. That's why a product from Viamo is so great, that it is just, you don't need a data connectivity for that at all. And I think if we do lose connection, that is part of our mitigation policies that we've incorporated in our protocols, and that's just the way that the cookie crumbles sometimes. And that's obviously one facet that we will have to go back with from our results and sort of tackle with the governments that are there. And sorry, just remind me a couple of the other questions.
Yeah, no, the second question was, obviously if you like, the disparity in clinical accessibility to digital tools depending on different healthcare organizations. But I guess we're using Pender Health facilities just only, right? So that probably mitigates against that.
Yeah.
And then the last question, sorry, was all about the different languages in Kenya. Yeah.
Yes. So I think in Kenya, when we've spoken to our Pender Health colleagues, they've said a lot of their patient footfall is typically in English. I think that's just to do with the sort of Nairobi being quite urban as it is. But maybe, yeah, if we were to go for another partner that was not in a city as urbanized as Nairobi, we would have that issue. But like I said, in Kenya, in Rwanda, we are definitely having that sort of translation and transcription from Kinyarwanda into English. And I think that would be really interesting to be able to compare that with our other results. I think in Nigeria, they're predominantly English speaking as well. But yeah, I think what is really interesting, though, we've had a chance to play around with the Viamo tool that's being used in Nigeria. And I think one key facet that we really liked was actually when you speak to the digital health assistant, they do have a few sort of colloquial inferences, or just the accent and the way in which they sort of, the rhythmic nature in which they go about their consultation is different to maybe what we would experience if we dialed into a service here. So there is a bit of subtleties there, but I think, yeah, it would be great to see what our results say when we have our Rwandan, Kinyarwandan language transcription versus the other two.
Oh, wow, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you. We can go back to the chat because there are still loads and loads of questions in there. But please do feel free to put your hand up. We've still got a couple of minutes, before we have to wrap up, so we could have a few more verbal questions. Let me just have a look. There's just too many to pick from. Oh, here we go. Let's go, Kevin.
Great presentation. Really interesting.
Thank you.
Just wondering how you're monitoring the quality at a technical level. So like you've got ambient recording. There's one of the big problems in ambient recording is an awful lot of background noise and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering how you're dealing with that, particularly in a situation where it's unlike the West. It's much more uncontrolled rather than controlled. I'm interested to see how you're managing that.
Yeah, good question, Kevin. So at the moment, our colleagues in Rwanda are working on the ambient listening tool, and they have sort of gone out to the communities and sort of trialed, and a lot of it is trial and error, and just sort of trialed it out just to see in which elements they can upgrade or increase its capabilities. Again, like I mentioned, they're a huge part of our results are going to be based on the training that we give our community healthcare workers, and our academic partners are doing a lot of work in order to be able to train them up for this kind of study. And part of our training also entails, to do with, okay, the best places to put the microphone and how far away to sit from it and that kind of thing. So whilst there is going to be a bit of a quality assurance analysis test from our colleagues, there is a lot that's also riding on the training up of the CHWs as well.
Just a follow-up. Are you allowing for, I suppose, what I would call unintended human effects, the human-computer interface? Because, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about LLMs is it's a new type of interface than we're used to using. And therefore, I mean, you've alluded to a little bit to colloquialisms, and sort of the way people go about things is a little bit different person to person and culture to culture. So I wonder if you could just elaborate on that and how you're managing that.
Yeah, I mean, I say a lot hones on the training of the CHWs, but we do want as much of the consultation to be natural at the same time. So a lot of it is just forget the fact that this is even recording your consultation, just go about it naturally. I think there are certain elements, because of the way the study is designed, that we've had to make it a bit more of a study setting. So for example, like when I said to Emma about describing where the pain is, just to reiterate that or to say it for the recording. But other than that, we want it to be as sort of natural as possible. And yeah, maybe that is the fact, when we then put the recording into the LLM, that could be one of the results that we see, that it's not sort of trained on, or it's not sort of learned how to take in that sort of human natural interaction, which might just be an interesting finding that we see.
Yeah, it's in the discovery, I think, of your data, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. I think I think, all the 3 trials are very much sort of first of their kind. So it would be great to then use this as a platform, either whether it's to implement the technology or to, take it on from there and create further studies.
Yeah, so interesting. I'm just going to close with a question, because everyone seems really interested in this, and I'm interested to know, is when will the results be published? What is the time scale of the study? And are you particularly focusing on somewhere in particular to publish it?
Of course, yeah, no, great. Thank you for asking that. So like I said, Kenya has already started with patient recruitment. We're aiming for 9,000 there, and like I said, the footfall of Penda is about 1,000 patients per day. Obviously, depending on who consents and who doesn't, but we are hoping that the trials will be done by the end of summer. I would really like, or just before the end of summer, fingers crossed. We are publishing preprints of our protocols. Well, they're going to be found on PATH, which is the sort of lead NGO with this, on their website, but I'm very happy to share with you, Emma, when they do come out, and you can by all means distribute them to the wider group. And then, yes, we are formally publishing our protocols in journals, and again, very happy to share them out. And then, yes, at the end, when we get our results, there will be a formal manuscript that comes from those as well. But yeah, I'll definitely keep in touch, Emma, and I know Joe's here as well, so yeah, you'll definitely hear about it.
Brilliant. Yeah, do share anything that comes out. We can share it in our newsletters and keep everyone updated, because it's really a really quite exciting study, I think. So just to wrap up today and say thank you so much to our speaker, Vaish. It's been really interesting. So many questions, and we had over 100 people attending, which is brilliant. So yeah, you attracted a lot of people to come to the meeting, which is brilliant.
Please, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, you're so welcome. It's really great. So thanks everyone. Yeah, a round of applause, definitely. But just to close our meeting, our next meeting, which speaker is still to be announced because we're still contacting a few people. Our next meeting is just in a couple of weeks' time, because this one actually was rescheduled because of the Easter holidays. So you will have the pleasure of us again in 2 weeks' time on the 13th of May. Again, it's a Tuesday at 12 or lunchtime, 12 o'clock. And also, Alicia hasn't been able to join us today, but in our last newsletter, we put out a link to a form, which I'll just share in the chat now. And this was so we're actually doing a bit of thinking and planning for future events at the moment in our organisers group for this group. We had a couple of ideas which had come out from speaking to members in January when we had a networking session, but also just through other conversations with members. So one was around an event to do with health challenges and AI solutions, where we can bring different stakeholders together to think about the challenges and what the solutions might be. Another one was around evaluating the evaluation and benefits realization for health AI. And if you go back and look at our newsletter, because I haven't got time to read all of the description of those, go back and have a look at the newsletter, and please do vote on which one of those you would be interested in. There is an option 3, which is to suggest an event that you would like us to organise. The next meeting, so the next meeting is actually the, oh, sorry, if I said the 13th of May, I think I should have said the, let's have a look, 10th of June. No, hold on. We're not in May, are we? We're just going into May. So it is May. So we've got our next one is the 13th of May. And then the one after that will be the 10th of June. That's right. Sorry, I've got myself confused with all the dates. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a really lovely rest of your day.